Good evening and welcome to Behind the Headlines. In this programme tonight we shall be discussing the hideous terrorist attack against the synagogue in Manchester, which occurred on Yom Kippur, the holiest day of the Jewish calendar. We'll also be discussing the second anniversary of October the 7th, the biggest mass terrorist attack against Israel in a modern history by Hamas. And could we finally be seeing the war in Gaza coming to an end and the release of the hostages, dead or alive? So joining me tonight is my good friend, Pastor Tim Gutman. As we're missing Reagan, he's out in Israel serving as the feast chaplain for ICJ UK, the annual Feast of Tabernacles. Tim, share with us your thoughts, because primarily events are moving so quickly and so fast when it comes to Israel that you, particularly in these programs we're doing on Behind the Headlines, we're now struggling to actually keep up with the momentum of events that occurred. Because last week on Yom Kippur, the holiest day of the Jewish community, in the Jewish calendar, we had the Jewish community attacked in that horrific Islamic terrorist attack. And of course, today, as this program airs, it's the second anniversary of the biggest mass terrorist attack in Israel's history. And of course, then we have the possibility of having the Gaza peace plan come into place with the return of the remaining Israeli hostages, whether dead or alive, plus an end to this 2-year war against Hamas in Gaza. I mean, events are happening so quickly at an extraordinary pace and an extraordinary set of events.
That's right, and I was saying actually, it feels like when Jesus was talking about the last days, he said it would be like birth pangs, and there'll be lots of contractions towards the end. It feels like there's something every week, and obviously Israel, I believe, and it is scriptural, it is the centre of biblical prophecy, is the mark of what Jesus is doing in the earth. And just tonight's show, for example, we're having to cover basically 3 shows worth in one evening, because so much is happening and it's all at the same time.
So let's remind ourselves of the overview of tonight's programme, which starts with what we saw on Thursday, the 2nd of October, at Heaton Synagogue in Manchester was a horrific Islamist terrorist attack that resulted in the murder of 2 Jewish worshippers as they remembered the most holiest day in the Jewish calendar, which is Yom Kippur. This was done by the Syrian-born terrorist Jihad al-Shamie, who murdered 2 Jewish worshippers. We also see that the government has a large part to play in this for inflaming the situation in support for a Palestinian state, the demonisation of Israel, and a failure to confront the anti-Israeli hate marches that we're seeing in London and other major cities across the UK. We're also going to, in this programme, commemorate the second anniversary of the largest mass terrorist attack in Israel's history that occurred on October the 7th, 2023. This is known in Israel as the Black Sabbath, where over 3,000 Hamas terrorists committed appalling atrocities on that day that involved murder of 1,200 Israelis and foreign nationals, between 6,000 and 7,000 injured, and many of those critical, but also taking 251 hostages back to that hellhole that is Gaza and kept in appalling conditions in these terror tunnels. We also see that, for example, we now could see the President Trump's Gaza peace plan come into effect, and we're asking, will this lead to the tribulation period, or is this peace treaty that will be implemented bring about a new era of peace and prosperity in the Middle East? I mean, just reflecting on these incredible events, particularly what's happened in Manchester, it is very personal, because you and I both have very close ties with the Jewish community in this country. I was in the University in Manchester for 3 years. I know a little bit about the Jewish community in Manchester as well. And of course, what happened last Thursday on Yom Kippur, the holiest day of the Jewish calendar, where Jewish worshippers were remembering that somber day. And this is the day where the synagogues are absolutely packed, because people want to be in that day of remembrance. They want their sins to be forgiven as they approach the Day of Atonement. And then to realise that an Islamist terrorist had tried to actually break into the synagogue, and in the process drove his car firstly at the gate of the synagogue, injuring the security guard at the front, then stabbed him, and then was carrying out a kind of shooting, and then tried to break into the synagogue itself to carry out a mass knifing attack as well. Just share your thoughts on how horrific and how essentially what we're seeing is that 2 years of incitement and hatred against Israel and the Jewish community resulted in innocent Jewish blood being spilt on one of our major cities, there's Manchester.
We've been saying for the last 2 years, the Jewish community have been telling us that, this was inevitable because of the incitement by the media, incitement by the government, recognising, for example, trying to recognise a Palestinian state without any conditions for Hamas. They've parroted Hamas propaganda and UN propaganda, despite the fact that eyewitnesses, most recently Richard Tice of Reform, he went to Israel and he said there's no genocide here. Israel is letting enough aid for 3,000 calories each per day. But despite all of that, the constant incitement, the constant inflaming of that Jew hate, the parroting of, let's face it, what is blood libels, modern day blood libels, Israel's killing kids, and in many ways it was inevitable. But the trauma since October the 7th, the Jewish people in our nation haven't had any chance to process even the trauma and the pain, because it's ongoing, and there's this feeling of betrayal, this feeling like they're not even wanted in this country, that we prefer their enemies that, by the way, are our enemies, this Islamist ideology. And a good friend of ours, he said on GB News, he said, listen, first the Saturday people, then the Sunday people, they hate you as well. You need to realise that. Israel's on the front line of something. But in many ways, when I heard about Manchester, Simon, my heart dropped, and we know some people there, and actually we knew a lady whose husband was barricading the door. Painful.
No, absolutely. Another reflection on this one as well is the second anniversary of October the 7th. I mean, this was the biggest mass terrorist attack in Israel's history. I remember, actually, it was a Saturday morning. It was a very hot Saturday morning for October, and very much like today's recording. And just having like these video feeds come up of Hamas terrorists that have infiltrated Israel. I'm like, what? What's happening here? You begin to question what you're actually seeing, because the prospect of Hamas breaching the most secure border crossing in the world, which is the Erez crossing between Gaza and Israel, is just something absolutely unthinkable. And then when that was breaking, my first initial thoughts were a number of things. Firstly, how do I get accurate information and an accurate picture of what's going on? So I kind of remembered then, if I can try and watch I-24 on YouTube, then I'll get this from an Israeli perspective. And when they were reporting there that this was happening at a multi-site locations, I realized then the scale of this was going to be huge. We're talking about thousands of Hamas terrorists on the loose, committing the most horrific, barbaric murders. And of course, we had the attacks on the kibbutzim, particularly near Oz and others that I visited. And then we've seen the attack on those that attended the Nova Music Festival, and the hideous murder of Hamas murdering just Israeli motorists on that highway known as Highway 242. Just absolutely unbelievable, the events of October the 7th, which means that Israel is never the same again, and our world's never the same again, primarily because what we saw was this principality of Jew hatred literally released upon Israel, upon the world. And ever since then, the Jewish people have been hunted by this demonic principality that is looking to destroy and harm the Jewish people. And we've seen it, the rise of evil with it, and our world hasn't been the same since. Absolutely.
This dragon spirit of Revelation 12 that hates God's people, this, like you said, demonic spirit. Listen, I wrote a piece on the beginnings of a book on the history of Jew hatred, particularly in Europe from the church leading up to the Holocaust. I never thought, actually, it was October the 7th hit me like a train, because I never thought we'd see those events, or events I'm writing about from pogroms in the 16th century, the kind of violence, I won't go into detail, but the kind of violence and despicable wickedness that you saw there, never would I thought we'd see it in our lifetime. Now, we know there's always in every generation this attempt by Satan to wipe out the Jewish people, this hatred that plays out in some way. And I was toying with the idea, maybe it's mainly online, this online pogrom in social media. But actually, when October the 7th hit, I was genuinely, I was just crying out, the tears. I couldn't believe in our day this happened, and then the response in our country, the people on the street, even after this recent attack in Manchester, that very night they were on the street in Manchester holding signs for Intifada. It's mind-boggling. It's illogical, it's hatred, but it's obviously satanic.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, this week as well, we could actually see towards the end of the week all the Israeli remaining hostages returning home, whether alive or dead. I think current news reports saying there might be around 20 still alive, but we don't know what conditions they'll be in when they actually come home. I mean, for the Israelis then to finally say, look, the war in Gaza will be over. But the big question is that everyone needs to ask is what next? What does the President Trump's peace plan in Gaza involve? Will this guarantee Israel's security? Will this mean that Hamas or other Islamists will never be able to have a stronghold on Gaza again? Or is this part of the international community preparing Gaza to be part of a future Palestinian state? How will that all work? And again, will this be bad news for Israel? So I think time will only tell.
That's right, and you mentioned as well the interesting question, is this like a mark of the tribulation? Because you talk about in Revelation a 7-year peace treaty, and interestingly, back in May, the Times of Israel reported that Hamas were demanding a 7-year ceasefire. So obviously we have to watch and keep an eye on what's going on, but is this, I mean, Trump is coming out strong. He's even given out a statement fairly recently saying Hamas needs to get this done now or you will be obliterated. There is hope amongst the Israelis, obviously desperately want their hostages home, and they desperately need that time of recovery, you know, that time of mourning, of time of just being able to breathe, you know, since the intense events and since of October 7th. But things are happening at such a fast pace. We have to, as believers, we have to be prayed up, we have to be biblically literate, and we have to be a voice for Israel.
In terms of biblically literate, we need to go to a very relevant scripture that reflects today's program. It's taken from Jeremiah chapter 31, verses 35 to 36. It says the following: "Thus says the Lord, who gives the sun for a light by day, the ordinances of the moon and the stars for a light by night, who disturbs the sea and its waves roar." In brackets, "The Lord of hosts is his name. If those ordinances depart before me, says the Lord, then the seed of Israel shall also cease from being a nation before me forever." So it's interesting, isn't it, that the stars will no longer shine in the sky, the sun will no longer give its light, the waves shall no longer roar if Israel is not ever a nation before me. So particularly those Christians who advocate church replacement theology, they've got a lot of rethinking to do, particularly in light of Jeremiah chapter 31, verses 35 and 36, but it's also reflective of God's love and compassion to Israel and the Jewish people.
Absolutely, and for those who are into replacement theology, you have to really ignore what's going on in the world and see how significant Israel is. I don't know how you can factor it, but let's go right back to the basic. Let's go right, you know, keep the word of God as the word of God. And remember as well, God said many times, God is not a liar. Here it is. His covenant with his people will never end. When you see the sun and the moon, you know that his love for Israel, his covenant, it always stands. He said, he promised Abraham, for example, the land forever. He promised Amos they would never be uprooted. You know, God is not a liar. He loves his people. His people have been a blessing. They've been a blessing. It was Jewish apostles that gave the gospel to the Gentiles, reclaiming them for God, for the kingdom of God. It was Jewish prophets whose words still speak to us today. So we know that we're living in the last days. It was Jewish kings whose reforms saw revival, and you know, they've been a blessing, and obviously they're hated by Satan. How can we ignore these promises? How can we ignore the word of God, and how can we ignore God's people, you know?
No, absolutely. And of course, giving us the 10 Commandments, which is the very foundation of our legal system and the very foundation of our Judeo-Christian heritage. And so as Christians, we owe the Jewish people and Israel everything. Now, back to what happened. So back on Thursday, the 2nd of October, which was Yom Kippur, sadly, Manchester was hit by a devastating Islamist terrorist attack. And this is how the Daily Telegraph has reported it. So Daily Telegraph reported on Thursday, the 2nd of October, under this headline: 6 minutes that brought terror to Britain's Jews. Hundreds of worshippers gathered for Yom Kippur. Then they heard the screams. And this journalist writes, it was meant to be a solemn occasion to mark the holiest day in the Jewish calendar. But about half an hour into the Yom Kippur service, several hundred worshippers at Heaton Park Congregational Synagogue in Manchester were interrupted by the sounds of screeching crashes and screams from outside. 6 minutes of terror followed, ending with 2 people dead at the hands of suspected Islamist terrorists who were shot by police. The rampage began when a black Kia Picasso car was driven at speed along the busy Middleton Road, ploughed into people standing outside the synagogue at 9:31 a.m. Thinking they'd just witnessed a road traffic accident, a member of the public called 999. But they were reporting the details. A man wearing all black climbed from the car, carrying a knife, and began stabbing an already injured security guard. Clad in what appeared to be a suicide vest, the shaven-headed, bearded man then made his way towards the entrance of the synagogue. Such has been the risk to British Jewish community since October 7th attacks on Israel in 2023, that synagogues across the country all have now beefed up their security.
Exactly, and it also says from the same report, as the attacker made for the front door of the holy building, he was challenged by those stationed there to keep worshippers safe. It's understood at least 6 people outside the synagogue were stabbed in the few horrifying moments that followed. It was later confirmed that 2 of those who were attacked had died, while 4 others were seriously injured. Witnesses described seeing the attacker then using his knife to stab at the window of the synagogue in an attempt to get into the building. However, mercifully, it appears that quick-thinking members of the congregation had managed to lock the doors from the inside. Armed police arrived in just 7 minutes after the first 999 call was made and shot the man close to the entrance to the building. And as they approached the man, he rolled over, attempted to get to his feet, prompting fears he was trying to detonate what looked like an explosive suicide vest. Police yelled at shocked members of the public to get back, warning them that he may have a bomb. One bystander shouted to the armed officer, "Shoot him, he's got a bomb, he's trying to press the button," and then a second volley of shots ran out and the man lay still on the ground. Nearby victims also lay prone, and 4 minutes later, at 9:41, the paramedics from the Northwest Ambulance Service arrived and began treating the injured.
I mean, firstly, it's just beyond horrific, and particularly because it happened on Yom Kippur. And so for many Jewish people, that Yom Kippur it's such a holy day that all their electronic devices had to be switched off. So many Jewish people didn't actually know what was happening in Manchester until literally they switched their phones on in the evening when the sun went down to realise here was another terrorist attack against the Jewish community in Manchester. I mean, my heart goes out to the community in Manchester, and what must they be feeling as well, those who attended the Heaton Synagogue that day, and then realising that a terrorist was at the door wanting to get in. Absolutely frightening scenario. And had he got in, how many more people would have been murdered from his horrendous stabbing?
Listen, the Jewish community have been warning about these events for 2 years because of the incitement that we spoke about. But still, it's that horrific realisation, when you're there, that this is actually happening. You mentioned about beefed up security. I've never known, churches needing to have security guards every Sunday they meet, or Jewish schools needing security guards, metal detectors, and
X-ray machines.
X-ray
if you go to a Jewish school, you have to literally. I went to one. Was it back in 2004? So it was a long time ago, well over 20 years ago. And even back then, you had to then have your rucksack had to go through a metal machine before you could actually get through, just as we see at airports. And that's just at a school. And of course, then security beefed up at synagogues, Jewish events and stuff as well. This is no way for the Jewish community to live in this country in fear and having that protection.
Well, it's indicative of what's going on in our nation. So many Jewish people are telling us, and you would have heard this yourself, that they feel now's the time to leave this country, which is devastating. It's devastating for us spiritually, number one, but for these communities, for these people, some of them have been here centuries. This has been a safe haven. Britain has for a few centuries now, a couple of centuries. And for now us to be in a situation where such Jew hatred is not only on the streets, but our media and our government are inciting and parroting the hatred from Hamas, for example, and from terrorist propaganda. For the Jewish community in Manchester, not just Manchester, you know, the whole of the UK, they're very connected. It's very much a family. These are times when they're actually questioning, do they belong in Britain? Do they have a future in Britain? Which, for me, is devastating.
No, absolutely. So let's have a look at this CBN news report of the day that terror came to Manchester, particularly Manchester's Jewish community, on the holiest day of the Jewish calendar, which was Yom Kippur.
As Jewish people prayed in synagogues around the world on Yom Kippur, the terrorist attack outside a synagogue in Manchester, UK, left 2 dead and 4 others seriously wounded. The police say one of the 2 men killed may have died from a police bullet.
Tonight, our first thoughts are with the families of those people who died, those injured, and those traumatized by this and horrific anti-Semitic attack on our Jewish friends and neighbours. We condemn it outright.
Following the ramming and stabbing attack, police immediately tightened security at synagogues throughout the country. British Jews felt such an attack was inevitable amidst increasing anti-Semitism in the UK. And Israeli leaders expressed their grief and said they have been warning about such attacks. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said in a statement, Israel grieves with the Jewish community in the UK after the barbaric terror attack in Manchester. Our hearts are with the families of the murdered, and we pray for the swift recovery of the wounded. As I warned at the UN, weakness in the face of terrorism only brings more terrorism. Only strength and unity can defeat it. Israeli President Isaac Herzog revealed he had written a letter to British King Charles III a few days ago, warning of rising anti-Semitism and anti-Israel hatred in the UK, along with Australia and Canada.
Thanks to CBN for that report there on the horrific terror attack in Manchester. And following on, expanding on the feeling amongst the British Jewish community that they no longer feel safe in Britain, Jake Wallace-Simmons, writing in Daily Telegraph on Thursday the 2nd of October, under this headline, Jews feel safer facing Hamas in Israel than living in Labour's Britain. When our community, this is what he wrote, when our community hears the Prime Minister and his party offer thoughts and prayer, it's hard not to see them as part of the problem. The Simons family has been in Britain for centuries. Yet now that her friends are emigrating, my mum has started to talk of doing the same. It's not just that Jews no longer feel safe in the country, it's that we no longer feel wanted. It's our enemies who are truly embraced. The attack at the synagogue this morning has caused many British Jews to ask that same old question again, and with greater urgency. When do we make our move? Bitter experience in living memory has shown the folly and tragedy of leaving it too late. And the pity of it all is that before October the 7th, Jews would retire to Israel for the weather. Some young families would move there out of religious conviction but retain strong ties to Britain. Now many feel forced out. The BBC, the UN, social media, the Gaza marches, the Labour government, there is a word for their attitude, and it's one we should have started using long ago. That word is incitement. The night before the Manchester attack, a mob flying Palestinian flag set off flares on the streets of London. The night before, when Tommy Robinson came to town, Sadiq Khan posted, "We must unite against those who seek to divide us. Where has he been the last 2 years?" And just talking about Sadiq Khan, for example, he also has been parroting this genocide claim. So much incitement, actually, not just banning these hate marches, and we've reported ourselves as CAAA, we've shown anti-Semitic placards, chanting for Intifada and Jihad week after week after week. Not only were they stopped, you get the sense from some in Labour, you get the sense from Sadiq Khan and even some in the Metropolitan Police that they actually support them secretly, you know, that they want them to do this. There's been so much of that feeling amongst the Jewish community, and of course that two-tier thing.
Well, Sadiq Khan, as Mayor of London, has kind of unprecedented power over the Metropolitan Police Force, so is it any wonder really then with him as the Mayor of London that these protests haven't started? And let's just remember what happened after October the 7th and the big, massive rallies that were in London and having experienced one of those at close hand, it literally felt like you were coming face to face with evil. Always imagine what it'd be like to be in Munich in the early 1930s. And that's what I got a taste of. And if you were Jewish, then absolutely horrific. I mean, I was concerned about myself with these programs and the Middle East report and having quite a high profile. So it's, a kind of a dangerous moment. And I can imagine if you were a Jew or you're Israeli in that situation, then it was beyond horrific. So we know that evil is rising. And sadly, on Sadiq Khan's watch, he's allowed this and perpetuated this. But we've also got to look at kind of David Lammy also being responsible as well, because as Foreign Secretary, he has ratcheted up that hatred towards Israel, the inflammatory language, constantly calling Israel out for committing crimes of genocide, for deliberately starving the people of Gaza, which we know are all lies, because they refuse to face the facts. He's the one that also put an arms embargo on Israel. He's also the one as well that allowed the International Criminal Court in The Hague to proceed legal proceedings against the Israeli Prime Minister for crimes of war crimes. So all these things we see that Labour is racketing up its anti-Israel policies time and time again. And of course, the latest to recognise a Palestinian state as well is not going to go down well with Israel. It's not going to go down with the Jewish community. And realising that what is the Palestinian Authority, what is Hamas? They're effectively a terror-sponsored states that are preparing their people not for war, but for violence and terrorism, as we saw on October the 7th. So to actually endorse that and to endorse the terrorists with their desires to destroy the nation of Israel, then we know that this government has placed itself on the wrong side of history. So is it any wonder then that the Jewish community are thinking, do we have a future in Europe? Do we have a future in Britain anymore? Because the pandemic levels of Jew hatred are off the scale.
Off the scale, there's the increase. I mean, we're talking record-breaking levels of anti-Semitism in this country, and in fact, levels of anti-Semitism around the world not seen since, obviously, the Holocaust and the pogroms in Europe. The hatred and the hostility against an ally that's fighting an enemy, that if it could, those terrorist ideology, that Islamist ideology, would as well attack Christians. You're seeing this in Nigeria. Christians are being slaughtered. I think 7,000 so far this year. People aren't aware of this. Christians are being persecuted in other Islamic states, and they said openly, actually on October the 8th, I remember at Al-Aqsa Mosque, they gave a speech saying, now we're going to go for Rome. And this is an ally that's holding back such wickedness in the world. And how has the response been so crushingly disappointing from our government, from our Labour government? From France, we know that, Canada, Norway, Spain, but this is our government, and I've never seen this in my lifetime, this level of anti-Israel feeling. Is it any wonder, by the way, that David Lammy was heckled and accosted when he tried to give a speech after them at Manchester?
It wasn't so tragic. It'd be actually quite amusing to see David Lammy in the rain and some of the Jewish worshippers there who are protesting about his visit, saying, visit Palestine. Which was the irony of all ironies, I think. So let's have a look now at Nigel Farage, the leader of Reform's response to the hideous Islamist terrorist attack at the Jewish Synagogue in Manchester.
The scenes of Jewish people being butchered on the streets of Manchester yesterday, I think, have shocked many of us deeply, deeply to the core. And I want to extend, on behalf of myself and our party, our absolutely most sincere condolences to all of those affected. But it's worse than that. It's bigger than that. It's deeper than that. I think the whole Jewish community in Britain are now deeply fearful. Within just a few hours of this horrific incident, we saw in London, Glasgow, and elsewhere, pro-Palestinian flags on the streets, people out, previously unplanned, demonstrating. But here's the truth of it. They weren't demonstrating. They were actually celebrating. I can't even imagine we've ever seen such vile scenes on our streets, certainly not in my lifetime. In response to this, the Home Secretary, Shabana Mahmood, says she's disappointed. Disappointed. That's the most the Home Secretary can say. Well, I hope all of you watching this video are outraged. Outraged and frankly frightened. This is broken Britain. This is evidence of societal breakdown. It is deeply worrying and very frightening. Will this Prime Minister do anything about it? No, in fact, he's emboldened these people by his recognition of Palestine 2 weeks ago. And never forget, this is the Prime Minister that took the knee just a few short years ago to an extremist group. Now, there is a big march planned in London this Saturday. And I think the only way we can describe it is a hate march. Whether the Home Secretary and the police decide they've got the powers to stop it, I don't know. What is for certain is we're a country that allows peaceful protest, but we're not a country that allows the celebration of murder or slogans in our street that are deeply insightful. I must admit, saying this now to you today, I feel more worried about the state of broken Britain than I ever have before.
Nigel Farage there, capturing, I think, the thoughts and the opinions of so many of us. Actually, this is reflective. What we're seeing, the government's response, the response by our Home Secretary, by our Prime Minister, the things they say, the incitement that's taken place. This really is indicative. It really does show how far our nation has fallen since days when we would proudly stand against wickedness, such as fighting the Nazis and being a safe haven for the Jewish people. And here we have our government recognising a Palestinian state, and recognising what? Recognising the Palestinian Authority that still pays to slay, or recognising Hamas, or, you know, what they did was embolden Hamas, embolden them to fight, to carry on fighting, but also to demand more negotiations. And so it is worrying times for our nation. It is worrying times for the government we have. The Daily Telegraph reported on Thursday, the 2nd of October, under the following headline, that the wave of anti-Semitic terror that followed October the 7th, fueled by a pro-Palestinian ideology, Jews have been targeted in a wave of global violence not seen since the Second World War. Anti-Semitic terror attacks have risen worldwide. Hamas sympathizers have used the retaliatory airstrikes and military offensive launched by the IDF in Gaza as an excuse to carry out terror attacks in Western countries. The latest suspected terror attack occurred on Thursday morning at a synagogue in Manchester, where 2 people were killed with a knife and car attack on Yom Kippur, the holiest day in the Jewish calendar. Fueled by extremist pro-Palestinian ideology, Jewish schools, synagogues, businesses and individuals have been targeted in a wave of global violence and harassment. In the UK, 4,103 anti-Semitic hate crimes have been reported since
Those that are reported, so how many haven't been reported?
Exactly.
Which is probably even higher, if not double the amount, because not everyone who receives anti-Semitic abuse or faces something actually then goes on to report it. So that's just the reported incidences of anti-Semitism. Yeah, the same article also talks about terrorist attacks in Europe and also in the United States. So it says also that police in Germany arrested 3 suspect members of Hamas for allegedly plotting attacks on Israeli and Jewish-run institutions in the country. The men were named as Abed Ali G, Wael FM and Ahmed 1 were apprehended in Berlin on October the 30th, the day before Yom Kippur. Prosecutors said that weapons seized during the raids included AK-47s, assault rifle, handguns, large quantities of ammunition. The men were arrested when they met for a weapons handover in the capital. The Federal Prosecutor's Office said the following: the weapons were intended for use by Hamas in assassination attacks on Israelis and Jewish institutions in Germany. 2 of the suspects were German citizens, while the other one was born in Lebanon. Then we see that in Boulder, USA, on the 2nd of June 2025, that an 82-year-old man was killed in a terrorist firebomb attack allegedly mounted by a pro-Palestinian activist in Boulder, Colorado. Mohammed Sambri Solomon, an Egyptian national, was said to have turned a garden weed sprayer into a makeshift flamethrower, which he used to attack a group of protesters marching in support of the Israeli hostages. He was said to have shouted "Free Palestine" during the attack. And then we also see the horrific attack against the Messianic Jewish diplomat at the Israeli embassy outside the Jewish Museum or the Jewish Center in Washington. That could on the 21st of May 2025.
And it's something that's reflecting all over the world. In fact, I would say that this Palestinian flag has become a symbol almost like the Nazi flag of the World War II, of the Holocaust. It's gathering so much hate and anti-Semitism. We've also seen as well anti-Semitism in France. Not a shock there, but we've seen attempts to burn down the Beit Yaakov Synagogue in the Grand Motte. Al-Hussein K, who's 33, was charged with terrorism, arson and hate crime offences after wrapping a Palestinian flag around his face and setting fire to the building with
I was
petrol.
only there. I was only there in June, just outside Montpellier. And Montpellier is a beautiful city on the Mediterranean Sea. And when we actually arrived in the evening, we went to go and get something to eat. And even then, there was a massive, great big protest, pro-Palestinian protest, right in the square, not far from the hotel that we're staying at. And even then, we saw that they weren't shouting in French, but they were shouting in English.
Wow.
You know, a free Palestine, all the chants and stuff as well. And my wife wasn't that impressed with Montpellier, but thankfully they went from the previous days and we didn't have that. So to show even the French Jewish community are facing so much kind of terrorism threat from Islamists, because our nations like Britain and France and Canada and Australia have actually surrendered to this Islamist threat, rather than standing up and recognising the evil that came against Israel on October the 7th is the same evil that would destroy us all in the West. And this is what Israel is. It's on the front line against these demonic evil principalities and powers of darkness, and they're confronting it. And yet our nations are so involved they're so apathetic, so morally indifferent, because they don't have a moral compass, that they are then siding with the enemies of Israel, not knowing that this will be a Trojan horse and it will destroy them and our nations and our societies with it, because that's the lesson of the Holocaust and that's the lesson of Jew hatred.
And let me turn my attention for a moment to the church. This is a time for Christians not to be silent. You know, you look back at the Holocaust, you look back at the majority of church leaders and church movements. See, there was only a very small minority that opposed the Nazis, about 20% of the German evangelical church. But and most of them were opposing the fact that the Nazis were trying to Nazify the church, not actually standing up for the Jewish people. And here we have such clear hatred that's clearly demonic. And if we can't discern that, I mean, you know, if we can't discern that this is satanic and the Jewish people are on the front line of something, you know, really major, if you can't discern that and you can't speak for that, I think these are times of tests for the church and for leaders. You know, the Bible says in Revelation, outside of the adulterer, outside of the murderer, etc., and it also says the cowardly. And I think, you know, God judges his church on these moments, and I think these are times to make stand. I've experienced anti-Semitism myself. People assume I'm Jewish. I have a tattoo. I've actually got a Star of David with a candle, and it says "Remember." You know, obviously I had family in the Holocaust. I got this when I was younger, but walking around Spain, it was constant. People coming up to me saying "Free Palestine, Free Palestine." We've had people in these Gaza hate marches in London telling us to go back to Poland. I've never been to Poland. You know, I don't know what that's about.
Yeah, your community, your family come from Germany, anyways.
Yeah, so you can see the hatred. You said yourself when you're in those marches, and so as Christians, now is the time. Comfort my people, speak peace. You know, stand with. Just show. These are key times. A great test, but opportunity as well to show our love after centuries actually of Christian anti-Semitism, and a lot of the libels and a lot of the hatred that came from so-called church and so-called Christians. Now's a time to bring healing. You know,
Let's say 2,000 years.
2,000 years.
That's what we're dealing with, particularly is the apostles, part of the early church, died out, and then what we saw then was a shift then away from the Jewish leadership of the early church with the apostles and the disciples, then followed by the Gentiles becoming the majority. And then of course then we saw the complete rewriting of history and biblical history with it, where the Jews were then excluded, and we stopped all the feasts.
That's right.
We stopped the Jewish calendar, and then embraced kind of that paganism with Constantine and ancient Roman paganism together with Christianity formed this new religion, which then became part of the Roman Catholic Church, and the kind of, the rest is history. But we also, aren't we, in this program as well, as of this program is being aired, marking the second anniversary of October the 7th, which is sadly the biggest mass terrorist attack in Israel's history, where the unthinkable happened. And for Israelis, it was the unthinkable happened because Jewish people felt like if they're in the world, whether they're in Britain, Europe, anywhere else in the world, they feel like that they wouldn't have that protection, that they could come under attack. But Israel was supposed to be that safe haven. And that was shattered on October the 7th, when Hamas carried out the most horrific, barbaric murders against Israelis and against foreign nationals, including the kind of mass raping at the Nova music festivals, the mutilations, putting babies in ovens. What Israel experienced on October the 7th in many ways was actually worse than some of the things we saw in the Holocaust.
That's right. Somebody made the point that in many they were worse. Hamas were worse because afterwards, some of the Nazi generals and people involved used to have to get drunk. They couldn't handle what they were seeing. They actually brought in gas chambers because they found it too hard to shoot them. And here we have these terrorists doing violence one-on-one to these people, to pregnant women, to babies, not only not feeling bad, but celebrating it, calling their parents, excitedly, being exhilarated by it. And then, of course, the response by those in the West and those in our country saying, this is exhilarating, this is amazing, intifada. It really was a crushing time. And at the same time, just before I read this from the Times of Israel, at the same time, I think what the enemy meant for harm, the enemy came in 7 directions, and Israel, the blow that God has used his people, he does protect and fight for his people, the blow to Hamas, the Houthis, Hezbollah, Syria, the IRGC, God's done some amazing miracles.
And the Iranian regime, the collapse of their nuclear weapons program and stuff as well. And Israel has emerged as the most strongest, powerful, most dominant force in the Middle East. But they weren't like that on October the 8th, the day after October the 7th, because Israel's deterrent capabilities were shot to bits. And for many of our viewers who don't understand the Middle East, it's all about the strongest nations survive.
That's right.
If you are perceived as weak, then you are vulnerable for attack. And this is why Israel sometimes gets it so wrong in misreading, for example, the Islamist mindset in the Middle East, thinking that if Israel shows that she's seeking peace and prepared to give land for peace, then Israel's rewarded nothing but violence and terrorism and murder when that happens.
And if you don't understand how the Middle East works, with these Western liberal, woke, kind of like bleeding heart people that only see the world through victim and oppressor, and somehow the people who've suffered the most and are recolonizing their ancient homeland are suddenly the colonial oppressor. If you don't understand that actually the Middle East only responds to strength, and Israel actually emerging now, more people will be willing to join the Abraham Accords, for example, because Israel has emerged as the single most, powerful player in the Middle East, particularly after what they did to the IRGC. And we don't understand that in the West, and these young people on the streets don't understand that, and they chant and they hold up the Palestinian flag. But we know this, we discern this. This is satanic, and Jesus is coming again soon. The Times of Israel reports under the following headline, Remembering the October Storm, 2 years of pain, anguish and resilience. Chaim Y. Botvinnik writes that Tuesday, October the 7th, marks the second anniversary of the worst tragedy to befall our Jewish people since the horrors and atrocities of the Holocaust. When reflecting upon this, it's so difficult to fathom that as we approach the second anniversary of this period of shock, trauma and despair, that we are still fighting a war in Gaza, our hostages still languish in the deep, dark, damp and decrepit tunnels of Gaza, and over 900 IDF soldiers lost their precious lives battling Hamas. During the most trying period of time, thousands of IDF soldiers were admitted to rehab, and many more are currently being treated for emotional shock and psychological trauma resulting from the war. The relentless and indiscriminate missile attacks on Israeli population centers and the profound loss of loved ones and friends continue to take its toll through periods of mourning, darkness, fear and depression. Truly, truly an intense time of trauma.
Absolutely. So let's have a look at this museum that's been opened in Israel that reminds the nation and the world of the horrors that occurred on October the 7th. And this is thanks to our friends at CBN.
The story of October 7th continues to unfold as new materials captured inside Gaza and Israeli territory are exposed. Vehicles, weapons, pictures, and clips, most of them made by Hamas and Islamic Jihad through their GoPros, help to tell the story of that fateful day. CBN News was given a look at some of the items. One of the most shocking things is how Israel's enemies instilled hatred of the Jews in the young for years, as displayed in these children's books. After the initial attack that morning, civilian mobs, including children and the elderly, joined the terrorists. Attackers came equipped with cameras on their foreheads and chests to document the rampage. On one of the terrorists killed in Ofakim, soldiers found a guide instructing them to focus on taking video of combat, killing, and captured prisoners, then explaining how to put all of it on social media. A 10-minute film compilation focuses on the attacks at the Nova Festival and in the communities surrounding the Gaza Strip. Some invaders carried UNRWA and international identification, while a handwritten note from one commander found in Sderot describes their enemy as an incurable disease that can only be dealt with by decapitation and uprooting hearts and livers. And an Arabic cheat sheet told how to say phrases in Hebrew like "take off your clothes." Many items add to the gruesome story, including kidnapping kits containing a stun gun similar to a taser, zip ties, a tourniquet, and drugs to calm down their victims. There was a Kalashnikov with a bayonet, machetes to cut off organs, which they did very systematically. There's a map of the layout of kibbutz Be'eri, where more than 100 were killed and 30 taken hostage.
I really wish I could say that I was shocked, but unfortunately I'm not. Islamic fundamentalists, jihadists, have always said it's about, the Saturday people first and then the Sunday people. So first it's about killing the Jews, and then it's about coming for the Christians. Whatever we see that they try to inflict on us, we know that it's going to happen next in the Christian world.
Ari Gottesman also viewed the materials. After seeing them, he spoke of being moved by seeing plans which dated back years alongside the actual events.
Which means this wasn't just an overnight response to something. No, this was a methodological, planned, ongoing attack with not a focus on soldiers or military gains of strategic value, but rather just to sow terror, just to harm innocent people, to target people in their beds, in their homes, their pets.
Gedalia Bloom, director of the Heartland Initiative Public Diplomacy Program, says seeing the artifacts and physical evidence made him realize that this is not just a local conflict.
This is a global incident that had support from all over the world. Those people who are physically arming the Hamas terrorists, giving them the intelligence they need, and supporting them, whether it be UNRWA funding, Iranian intelligence. This should be seen as it really is, that this is a war against the West and Israel's at the front lines.
Bloom believes instead of trying to use this evidence to convince those who deny the attack, Israel should use it to bolster those who love and support Israel.
We need to stop playing defense and start playing offense and start winning more. That's also my big takeaway, is that we need to use this in order to strengthen our own resolve and to build better capabilities to strengthen Israel.
Julie Stahl, CBN News, Ramat Sharon, Israel.
A very powerful report put together there by our friends at CBN. Now, I do actually recommend a brilliant film on October the 7th by my good friend Igal Chet, who's a Canadian-Israeli filmmaker. He made the film The Killing Roads, and you can see that on YouTube. Horrific viewing, but I think it's important that we all know what happened on October the 7th to realise that this was the biggest mass terrorist attack in Israel's history. This was the largest single attack and murder of Jewish people since the Holocaust, and that was over 80 years ago. And what we saw had those echoes of Holocaust all about them. I mean, you see the kibbutzes that are destroyed, you see, for example, the Nova Music Festival. For those young party goers, there was literally no escape from Hamas on that day.
Horrifying, and of course they were, the peaceful types that were celebrating a party, and a dance festival on what was to celebrate Sukkot. In fact, the Times of Israel on the 6th of October, under the headlines, 2 years on, the Nova Festival survivors gathered to honour the dead, talking about the hundreds of bereaved family survivors and friends gathered in Tel Aviv, mentioning that 378 people were murdered at Nova, 378 young, peace-loving, festival-going, dancing young people were murdered, and of course many more were kidnapped, dozens more actually, and so many traumatic war crime, so much barbarity in Nova, so many people were raped, and these were people that were coming just to, there was no politics, there was nothing they did. This was satanic, and they came on there, and this was really sick as well, Simon.
Paragliders, yeah.
They had paragliders on the streets of London celebrating this. Do you remember this?
With the stickers, yeah.
Yeah.
And of course, even now the UN haven't really investigated the sexual crimes of violence and the mass rapes committed by Hamas against the women that were part of the Nova Music Festival, which was horrific. And of course, because it's very flat, there wasn't many places to hide. Many of them hid in toilets. They hid in bins to survive Hamas. And if you survived the Nova Music Festival, then that's incredible grace of God that you did. But other than that, just beyond horrific. So we've got 4 minutes left of the programme, so we need to touch on a little bit about Donald Trump's peace initiative. So he's come out and last week and declared his plan for Gaza, and that he believes that Hamas have agreed to this deal to effectively hand over the remaining Israeli hostages, both dead and alive, and which will bring an end to the military conflict almost 2 years in Gaza.
Absolutely, and he is optimistic. I mean, Donald Trump has been a president that's been trying to get peace, for example, with Russia and Ukraine, and it's a big part of his ticket, a big part of his agenda. And when we were asking the questions, when are the hostages coming back? Is it going to be an eked out process? He's mentioned this deal, which could see them released all in one go, which I think is quite incredible. The Daily Telegraph reported on the Sunday the 4th that Netanyahu says all hostages will be freed in the coming days. He said that all Israeli hostages will be released. Hailing Donald Trump's plan to end the war, in a televised address to the nation, the Israeli Prime Minister vowed that the living hostages, thought to be about 20, at least 20, would be brought home during the Jewish festival of the Tabernacles, or Sukkot, which runs from the 6th to the 13th. Mr. Netanyahu said at the beginning of the war, "One of our officials said we doubt if we'll be able to even bring one hostage back alive, but I never gave up on the others, nor achieving the other objectives of the war." The Israeli leader, 75, said it was his resistance to international calls to stop the fighting and that helped to eradicate Hamas and apply the necessary military pressure.
Excellent. So let's see now President Trump addressing the nation with his proposed peace for Gaza.
I want to thank the countries that helped me put this together: Qatar, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Jordan, and so many others. So many people fought so hard. This is a big day. We'll see how it all turns out. We have to get the final word down in concrete. Very importantly, I look forward to having the hostages come home to their parents, and having some of the hostages, unfortunately, you know the condition they're in, come home likewise to their parents, because their parents wanted them just as much as though that young man or young woman were alive. So I just want to let you know that this is a very special day, maybe unprecedented in many ways. It is unprecedented, but thank you all, and thank you all to those great countries that helped. We were given a tremendous amount of help. Everybody was unified in wanting this war to end and seeing peace in the Middle East, and we're very close to achieving that. Thank you all, and everybody will be treated fairly.
President Trump there on the proposed peace initiative with Israel and Hamas, which includes the release of all the hostages. Truly momentous days. These are fast-moving events. We're talking about all the hostages released. We're talking about, I mean, as Christians who follow prophecy, we're talking about a peace treaty perhaps between Israel and her neighbours. Really, really is incredible days. Days of trauma, days of mourning, sad days, intense days since the Manchester attack as well. So much has happened, so much is happening. This is a time for us, don't you think, just to be praying and being vocal in our love for Israel?
No, of course it is. Of course it is, Tim. And, you know, as we reflect on not only the Manchester terrorist attack, we reflect on the second anniversary of October the 7th, but also this proposed peace plan, we see that there are different agendas at play. The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu wants to see the destruction of Hamas, to ensure that Hamas never is in control of Gaza again, and Gaza's demilitarized, with Israeli security forces providing the overall security for Gaza. We see that President Trump just wants an end to the conflict, so there isn't there isn't major international problems in terms of Gaza, but also what we see in the international community want a new Gaza in order to incorporate into a Palestinian state. So yes, we're living in extraordinary times. Tim done a great job as we mark the second anniversary of October the 7th, and thank you for what you and Haley and others do in standing up for Israel and the Jewish people at this critical time. And I want to thank you for watching this program at home. You know, clearly it's a very difficult time for Israel. It's a very difficult time for the Jewish people. It's a very difficult time for the church that loves Israel and the Jewish people. But this is no time that we surrender from the rise of evil and hatred in our day. We need to show that love. We need to show that peace that comes from God to comfort Israel and the Jewish people this very difficult time in our nation's history. And we'll never forget the horrors that happened on October the 7th. So thank you for watching Behind Headlines.